much of great feedback from Rudy's session today in the morning, and we couldn't but have a session where we not only untap into Rudy's thoughts on future of work, but really untap into his experience of building startup to scale up. As you all know, Rudy co-founded Kenexa and then sold it to IBM in 2012. Maybe one of the most exciting and the largest exits that happen in the HRM space. So it's a privilege to have you with us, Rudy.
Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How many of you are in the entrepreneurs? How many of you are wannabe entrepreneurs? What are the rest of you doing here?
So what we're going to do with you, Rudy, today is I've prepared some questions to get started, but I'm going to very quickly go to all of you because this session is yours. I'm just here kind of managing the time and making sure that we get as much from you, Rudy, today. And then I'm going to close with some quick fireside chats as a closing, just to make it a little more fun. So, Rudy, the first...
At my expense, right?
At your expense,
okay.
Yeah, with your liberty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to start with the first question related to, on the hindsight, if you were to look back, and that's a question that I think many of us who have been entrepreneurs, maybe halfway on our journey, we all have hindsights, that if I were to look back and what are the things that make you successful, you know, what would those be on a hindsight?
It's hard to say in hindsight what's made me successful because being an entrepreneur, you realize is a large element of luck in terms of being at the right time in the right place or having the right kind of support that you need. So let me give you two examples and maybe that'll be helpful. The first one was I had the independent rights to sell Panadol in the Commonwealth of Independent States in the former Soviet Union back in the 1990s when the Iron Curtain came down. And I was out there hustling the sale of Panadol, which is the third largest brand of painkillers in Europe. And when I was in St. Petersburg, a gun got pulled on me by the Russian mafia, and I had to flee. Now that was an environmental thing. The business never really got off the ground. And I made a choice. I said, my life is more important than money. It was a difficult decision because it was kind of close, but that decision was made. Kenexa was beginning the journey, and what happened was PeopleSoft got into a big battle with Oracle around acquisition. They took the eye off the ball on the HRIS, which left an opening for the Kenexas and the Teleos and the SuccessFactors of the world. There's a lot of luck associated with that. So if you ask me when I look back at hindsight, I would say probably luck and environment is the #1 factor. It's the ability to then run away and be a coward when the environment is wrong to survive to fight another day than it is anything else. So maybe cowardice is the #1 successful attribute I have.
So I want to push you here a little bit because I think luck is for those who are watching. So is it just luck or is it just about being on the ball and being able to analyze what's going on and make sense of it?
So when I was sitting there, I think I mentioned this in the opening session, I wasn't smart enough to get a job at Mercer. But I am reasonably smart. I'm probably more hardworking than most people. I'm not the hardest working person I know, but I'm pretty hardworking, and I could probably outwork most people. I think I probably have more resilience. There's a part of me that when there is rejection in the life of an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of rejection, you tend to go and cower into a ball. Some people do that. I tend to kick back the next day. And there is a simple process that I carry out. At the start of every morning, I ask myself a question: what opportunity out there is one that I didn't see yesterday. And I approach every day that way. And I've been doing that for 40 years. And I think that sense of resilience is really helpful as well.
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'm going to come to all of you. So have your questions ready, because I want to move to the audience. If you were an early stage entrepreneur, like many of you who are listening us today, what business would you be doing?
The one where I could make lots of money. Seriously.
That's it?
Seriously.
Elaborate.
Look, I am a very greedy person. I like money. No, let me rephrase that. I love money. No, let me rephrase that. I adore money. So I am very, very, very greedy and very financially oriented. So it's all about the customer, it's all about my margins, it's all about the growth, it's all about the money. I'm sorry, Esther, I know it's not the right thing to say.
I love that, and I can see many of you nodding and smiling, so there you are.
How many of you are greedy here? You'll be successful, don't worry, man.
Great. So let's go to questions from the audience. How many questions we have? Can I have all the hands up? So one more. Come on. You don't get to have an opportunity to ask questions to Rudy Karsan very often. So this is the time. Two more. Three. Very good. Thank you. All right.
You don't count. You don't count.
Yeah, you can also ask a question. Good. So should we take them one by one, or you want to take them together? And
You're the boss.
all right. So let's start with your question. Would you introduce yourself as well, please? Yeah. Thank you. No, we can't hear you. So sorry.
Hello.
Yes. Now it's fine. Yes.
My name is James Green. I work for HackerTrail, which is a AI-based recruitment platform. We can't sit here and suddenly decide to be lucky, so that advice isn't going to be that helpful. We can try and be more resilient, but looking back on your career, what's the one thing that you would do differently than you did?
Thank you. Thank you, James.
I would have probably learned to cut my losses quicker. If I look back on my career, places where I probably, so let me give you an example. Every time I made a mistake, I had to go out there and get funding to pay off the mistake and dilute my position in the corporation. So by the time Connexa was sold, I only being a big number, but I owned about 20% of it. If I look at my mistakes, I would say probably I lost half my position because of bad mistakes that forced me to go out there in capital and dilute myself. I could have probably shaved off half those losses had I made quicker decisions and not let my ego get in the way. There is a tendency I have of wanting to be right. And because of that stubbornness, I sometimes stayed with a decision that inherently I knew was wrong, but my pride and my shame wouldn't allow me to change course. So I would probably boil it down to either shame or pride.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to go next? Can we have the mic here, Jeremiah? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, Rudy, Ester.
Yes.
I'm Nina. I'm the founder,
Nina.
CEO. Nina.
Nina, yes,
Yeah.
go ahead, Nina.
Founder, CEO of Zopa. What is your advice to a company like ours? So we've just closed our seed round and we are going into a Series A. So what is it that a company needs to be prepared for Series A? That's my first question. The second question is, the early investors that we have met for Series A say that, they like to see a certain amount of revenues. My question is, if I have the revenues, why do I need the funding? So those are my two questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nina.
So let me tell you something. Advice is very difficult because I never know your life. I never know the hues and the colors and the pains and the victories of your life. So rather than say what advice I can give you, I can tell you what I did in your stage. I really focused heavily on the customer. Now, that may sound like a trivial statement, but it really isn't. In the product world, the chief product officer or the CEO, the founder, or the chief technological officer is very proud of their creation. And that pride is well justified. And then when the customer says, I want something different, they go, no, I'm not going to let you create a roadmap. It's my product. It's kind of like calling my baby ugly. One of the things I've learned is my baby isn't ugly, it just needs to be dressed somewhat differently. So in the early stages of my career, I had a level of arrogance around the product that probably wasn't justified. So, and I see that a lot with the startups. They're so proud of their product, they don't care whether anybody buys it or not. Well, the product really isn't your baby, and you're not a pimp if you sell your product. If you're a pimp if you sell your kid, but not your product, right? So if the customer says, I want these changes, do those changes. And that's what I've learned. So I don't know how relevant that is. The early investors, the seed capital, is extremely difficult to find. I got my first check by borrowing against my credit card, which was a facility that was available in the US and might not be available in these parts of the world. You are not going to get other people's money until you show a certain amount of traction. There's only two ways you can get money from people. Either they love you, so your parents and your siblings will write you out the check and they will tell their friends, I've already written that off. So they're basically being your patron, and you're the charity and they're contributing to you, or they trust you. Those are the only two ways you can get money. It's either they love you or they trust you. I'm really an obnoxious person, so there are very few people that love me. So that source wasn't available for me. The only way to develop trust is to show some sort of traction. Now, the startup world is a lot more active today, and people are willing to kind of say, I'll trust the story. It used to be a lot more trusting 10 years ago until a whole bunch of people lost their money. So I think the best piece of advice I can give in today's world in terms of communicating with people like me would be to recognize and tell me that you recognize that you got to build the trust. So rather than saying, how can I get your money? It's more like, what do I need to do to prove to you that I'm worth getting your money? So maybe if you change the conversation a little bit, it might be helpful. I know it's helpful with me. I don't know if it'll be helpful with others.
Thank you. Thank you, Rudy.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nina. Thank you. You had a question? It's been answered? Yeah, it's been answered. Okay. How many more questions we have? Yes? Okay, yes, please. Go ahead.
I'm just doing this because the light's coming in. I'm not trying to get close to you, so
I can
relax.
understand. My name is Suman, and I've been a Kenexa brass ring user for many years, and it was a
Condolences.
Yeah. I wanted to understand, how do you know it's time for you to let your baby go? How did you decide that it was time for you to let Kenexa go at the time?
The deal closed on, I was mentioning this to somebody over lunch, the deal closed on December the 2nd, 2012. The first morning I woke up without tears in my eyes, like literally crying the night before, was December 24th. So for 21 nights I fell asleep crying. You don't, it was snatched away from me.
So if you were to go back, will you do the same? How is your life changed now that you're not an executive entrepreneur, but actually helping other entrepreneurs in their journey?
Look, Taleo and SuccessFactors were already sold. Workday was coming behind. Life is cyclical, right? If I don't I love my kids. If I don't let them go, they'll never become healthy adults. It was time for me to let Conexa go. So I'm not sure I would say, what would I do differently from that perspective? Conexa is the big story, but in my life, I've started like about 10 or 11 different companies. And in some cases, I've been willing to let go a lot earlier. And in some cases, in most cases, I've gone belly up. So I've been bankrupt 3 times in my life. And it's not fun when you're bankrupt, let me tell you. Once I had to physically break the piggy bank of my children so I could buy the gasoline or the petrol to take me to a place where I could kind of hammer the check. So I've seen kind of what it's like living on coupons and having no money. But at the end of the day, I really am the luckiest person I know. So it would be most insulting to the gods to say, what could I do differently? I've had an incredibly lucky life. I've been very fortunate. I'm in my 60s. I take no drugs. I mean, I need no medicine. I'm wide awake every morning. My wife and we started, I was a little bit of an autistic kid. And I never thought I would ever find somebody who would love me. My wife fell in love with me at age 18, and it was very liberating for me. And we're still the best of friends 40 whatever years later. I talk to my kids 4 or 5 times a week. My grandchildren live a mile away, and we have dinner 4 or 5 times a week. They spend a night with me or 2 with my wife and myself. So how can I be anything but eternally grateful? So really no mistakes or no regrets. But I was saying that at a session I did at Stanford, and somebody in the audience who was in the 20s, a very smart lady, kind of gave me this look and said, "That's really arrogant." So let me elaborate on that a little bit. I said I had no regrets. That doesn't mean I didn't make any mistakes. And in my mind, the difference between the two is acknowledging my mistake, embracing my mistake, forgiving the other person, and then most importantly, forgiving myself. And once I get to the point where I forgive myself, I have no regrets. And it's hard to get there because I do carry a lot of guilt around that.
It's so beautiful, Rudy, to hear you. And I've had the privilege to hear your story in other conversations. And every time I hear, I think there is new deep learning getting unlocked just by hearing the way you express it with so much of authenticity and so much of generosity. So thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank
you. I mean, you guys are amazingly generous with your time. It's your time that's valuable, right? I love the sound of my own voice, and you let me talk. How much better could life get, right?
So let me go to the fireside, unless we have more questions. Satya, you have a question? We have a question there. How are we doing on time? Can we take them? We good. Fantastic. All right. So let's move the mics. Yes, introduce yourself as well.
Hello. I'm also a Rudy. My name is Rudy Ramin, and co-founder and CEO of Grow, which is a team development platform.
Okay.
My question is related to what you were talking about when you had been bankrupted for 3 times. What drove you to stand back again and try again? And also, what kind of support network did you have? Did they support you? Was there a lot of resistance from your family or friends who have seen you fail?
Thank you for that beautiful question. Thank you.
I'm an FSA, which is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. It was rated the #1 profession in Canada when I became an actuary. When I left for my first business, my mother never admitted to her friends that I was out there hustling. She still pretended I was an actuary. So my family had a lot of shame around the fact that I left a great job and tried to do something different. And then after that, she kind of owned me again, but she disowned me for a little bit of time there. I mean that somewhat facetiously, but not completely, right? So family support was difficult in the early stages. Let me share this story with you. Fear is a constant companion of mine. as an immigrant, when I went to Canada, the first piece of furniture we got was a carpet from the garbage dump that my brother and I cleaned using a toothbrush. And so we had a box spring, a mattress, and a carpet on which we ate our food, had our social time, the four of us, my parents, my brother, and I. The house that I owned was fairly close to my parents' place. And then when I moved to the US, there was enough appreciation that my parents could pay off the mortgage on my house, and my wife and I granted that home to my parents. So, like good Desi children, we could leave our parents at least somewhat self-sustaining, and in appreciation for them bringing us to Canada. But what I did was, in the basement, I put a box spring, a mattress, and a carpet, and $2,000 of cash between the mattress and the box spring. That was my security blanket. After I sold Connexa for over $1 billion, so I got somewhat wealthy, right? My parents became old. This is 2014 now. They moved to a condo. They wanted a small 2-bedroom condo. I made it 3-bedroom. In the 3rd bedroom, I have a mattress, a box spring, and $2,000 between the... Now, at age 60, I think I'm still going to lose it all. And that's my security blanket. So I don't think you ever kind of lose that fear. And so I've lived with it all my life, but I'm just a little bit more comfortable talking about it because the world has told me I'm successful. But deep down, I'm still a little scared little boy. I mean, I get really scared and anxious. So you get around it through sheer resilience. Like the fear just absolutely captures you to the point where you become ineffective. And there is nothing, I probably give 90% of the credit to my wife, because she had a way to kind of hold my hand and let me cry on her shoulder while we navigated through that.
So Rudy, I'm gonna go to you, Satya, in a minute. But I remember one story or one approach that you shared in one previous conversation about how you deal with fear, and how you talked about when there is darkness and there is night, you can either walk towards it or go against it. Would you want to share that with the group?
You see, now you know why I love Esther. She remembers my words from 9 years ago. I'm so honored and touched. The world revolves from west to east. That's why the sun rises on the east. Early in my stage, in my career, I didn't understand that life was cyclical and that darkness would come. So every time I sensed the darkness coming, I ran the other way. And then one day I realized that in order to shorten the night, if I ran into the darkness, the night would shorten. So there are 2 things I do. One, I run into the darkness and I embrace it. And the second is I talk about it. Because the funny thing about shame and fear is the more I talk about it, the more permission I give myself to do that, the less the fear and the less the shame. Because now you know about it, so I'm not ashamed. And so, whatever the fears you have, if you can learn to just acknowledge them, accept them for what they are, and understand that embracing them and putting them in the light actually shrinks them and doesn't help them grow. They're kind of like mushrooms. They grow in the dark and die in the light.
Thank you. Thank you, Rudy, for sharing that. Satya, you had a question? Thank you.
Rudy, quite inspired, but since morning I've been hearing you. We have invested in a couple of companies. I failed miserably once, but 3 has been going successful. I have invested on a passion. Now in the future, what do you think, apart from the passion, I should look for any company I'm investing in? Or else, as per your guidance, because you're experienced one?
At this stage, let me just make sure I understand the question. You're saying, how do I detect the passion in the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I have invested on the passion. 3 of them have been successful. They are doing pretty well. We invested 3 years back. But what else apart from the passion? Because I miserably failed because I saw the passion in that guy, but that guy was not trustworthy.
How did you know? Look, I've been investing only for about 4 years or 5 years, right? I've had 5 years. I've had some successes, but I'm still a student in there. So let me share my learnings because I consider myself very much a rookie in that area. Passion are table stakes, right? If you watch the World Cup final between Argentina and France, can you tell by passion who's going to win? Probably not. They're both equally passionate. Passion is table stakes. I try and look at it a little differently. I've reached a stage in my life where annoying people or people I don't like being around are a drag on me. So if there is somebody I don't like, I will not invest in them, no matter how rich. And in fact, I had the opportunity on a couple of deals to get in, and I just didn't do it. And not because I don't want any more money. I'm as greedy as the next guy, and I'd love some more money. But for me, life is just a little too short now. I'm much older than you, and I tend to really, really love life. So part of the love I have is being around people like Ester. It's energizing, it's fun, it makes it worthwhile. And so when I look at entrepreneurs, I really want to understand if they understand how to scale. Because if they don't scale, the business is not going to happen. So the first question is, are they willing to scale? And the second question is, do I trust them to the point where we have shared interests? Trust is a funny word. You can't trust somebody totally, right? Because if your interests aren't shared, in the hierarchy of morality, greed and fear trumps compassion. So if there is a lack of joint interest or best interest, then the entrepreneur will kill you, and I accept that. So my trust is to the point where the aligned interests are equal. The last thing I think I probably do, which makes me feel comfortable, is I get into discussions about not the business. So I'll either discuss debt, or one of the questions I ask is, how did you and your spouse meet? Give me that story in tremendous detail. And so I get to know how the person thinks. To me, that's how I get closer to people.
Thank you, Rudy. So I'm going to take the last question because I can hear that the startup track is going to start and many of you may have to go there. So last 1 or 2 questions. Okay, we have one here. Any other question? Then I'll take them all and try to answer. Then one here. Any other questions? I want to make sure no questions are left unanswered today. All right, so we'll take these 2 at the same time. Can we give it to Ashutosh first, and then you can go to Pushkar?
I'm here.
Yeah, hi, Rudy, Ashutosh this side. So I heard long back from Azim Premji, an MDI. He said that for you to be an entrepreneur, is you must rely on your gut feeling. How do you see this thought process for a venture capitalist like you, for startups, especially India as an ecosystem?
I don't play in India, so I can't answer that in the Indian ecosystem. From my perspective, the way I decided on it was, I had a fairly lengthy discussion with my children on how much to give them, how much should go into charity, and when I reach the end of my life, what are their expectations? And basically, the message I got back very clearly from my children was, not only are we not expecting anything, but we don't want anything. Because the third generation always loses the money and are the losers. And that's our children, and we don't want them to suffer. We don't want the first generation to make it, for us to say, for us to look after it, and the third generation then spends it. we don't want our children to go through that. So my children basically liberated me and said, do whatever you want to. So right now, I'm like a kid in a candy store. I have no limitations, and I can mess around. I mean, it doesn't bother me if I lose a certain amount of money. It's not a big deal. But with that mindset, I'm highly competitive. I have to win. I hate to be a loser. So to me, in the VC game, it's making the right bet. So it's been a really fun exercise for me. My first 4 investments went down to 0. My 5th, I made 26 times my money. My 6th, I made 5. My 7th, I made 4. So I'm kind of well ahead of the curve. But it's kind of the last 5 years in the asset business, it's really hard to lose money because the whole world has been kind of climbing. So I don't know how good I am. I got in at the right time. I got fairly lucky. Asset prices have been climbing, so I've been a beneficiary of that. So I don't know yet where I'm going to end up.
Thank you.
If I lose everything, can I come to you? Can you help me out? Okay.
Thank you, Rudy. I'm taking the last question. Yes, Pushkar, go ahead.
Okay, hi, I'm Pushkar from People Matters. I work with a lot of HRTech co-founders, early stage co-founders for their go-to-market and marketing related challenges. Now, one big thing that comes up from all the co-founders is we want to work with large enterprise accounts. The challenge over there is, do they really want to work with smaller startups? And what do you have from your journey? How did you overcome in your initial days of Kenexa of working with larger enterprises? How did you convince them?
I lived in a very different time. So again, advice is really difficult, right? In our world, in the world I lived in, a lot of times enterprises had no choices because PeopleSoft wasn't supporting recruiting. And they gave us, the companies would welcome us. We had inbound leads, so we lived in a different time. And so our world was very different. In my current companies, the way I kind of advise them is large companies are aware that there are a lot of options for them. So you have to walk in saying they're going to abuse you. The question is, how much are you going to let them abuse you by? And so don't tell me about your pilots that you get no money on because they've got 17 of those pilots going. The question is, how can I use another tactic? And the tactic I use right now is I own the data if you don't pay me the money. And it's working, at least in the US. If I own the data, if they don't pay me the money, they start find a way to pay me the money so they can keep the data. And so that's one tactic that has worked for me.
Thank you, Rudy. So time is up, and when we were designing this conversation, this was supposed to be a masterclass format, and which means a one-way, where Rudy will do a masterclass for us about scaling up. And when he told me that let's do a Q&A instead, I was a little wary because I was thinking, how will a masterclass be in a Q&A format? And now that I've experienced, and all of you have as well, I think the diversity of richness of going through tactical inputs to more fundamental human journeys that we all going as entrepreneurs, I think it's been really, really rich and fantastic. So thank you so much, Rudy. Let's give him a very big round of applause.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.